This video is sponsored by OWC. Last month, Apple announced a new MacBook Air and an iPad Pro, with an all-new Magic Keyboard accessory to really give the iPad Pro that traditional laptop-like feel. This past week, Apple also launched its latest 13-inch MacBook Pro, and so in this video I figured why not quickly break down these three devices to see which one might be right for you. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to get notifications whenever we share a video. Before we get into the comparison, I do want to let you know which machines we tested for this video. The MacBook Air is the base model that features a 10th gen dual-core Intel Core i3 processor, Intel's Iris Plus graphics, 8 GB of RAM, and 256 gigs of internal storage. On the MacBook Pro side, we also have the base model, but it features an 8th generation quad-core Intel Core i5 processor with Intel Iris Plus graphics, 8 GB of RAM, and 256 gigs of internal storage. Finally, the 2020 iPad Pro offers Apple's A12Z Bionic chip, 6 GB of RAM, and 128 gigs of internal storage. The base model MacBook Air that we have is $999. The MacBook Pro is $1299, and the iPad Pro with Magic Keyboard, which in my mind is a necessary accessory to get that full laptop-like experience that we talked about, that will cost users around $1350. So last month, we did a comparison video of the MacBook Air and the iPad Pro, and we spent a lot of time going over the differences between each device, so I don't really think we need to do that again. If you do want to see that video, I'll leave that link in the card in the upper right-hand corner. But instead, I kind of want to go over performance and benchmarks of each device, talk about what I think each device is capable of, and which one I'd choose if I had to pick one. So in terms of benchmarks, and really starting with Geekbench, which is kind of the go-to, for people who aren't familiar with exactly how powerful these iPad Pros can be, you'll be plenty surprised to see that it's very capable of outperforming both the MacBook Air and the 13-inch MacBook Pro. In fact, the iPad Pro just barely edged out the new 10th generation Intel processor on the MacBook Air and is quite a bit ahead of the 8th gen chip that's found on the base model 2020 MacBook Pro for single-core scores. In multi-core, the iPad Pro was far and away ahead of both the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air, with the MacBook Pro coming in second by a healthy margin over the MacBook Air. I guess it's comforting to know that this very expensive iPad is benchmarking better than the other two options, but how does this translate into real-world use? Well, for me as a content creator, something that I do on a regular basis is transferring files from an SD card or an external hard drive, or exporting videos from a project. And so I performed each of those tasks on these devices. This isn't going to be an exact science, but I did my best to kind of time things out. And with this file that's about 1.3 gigs in size, a very standard small video file that I might transfer and move around quite a bit, that took approximately 5 seconds for both the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air. While the iPad Pro unfortunately suffered a lot with not only transferring files from external drive to the iPad, but just kind of file management as a whole is still not very good. It's still weird to see this very powerful iPad take nearly 50 seconds to finish that transfer. Now, on the other hand, when exporting a video in Final Cut Pro, or for in this case of the iPad Pro, we had to use LumaFusion, things are a bit different. The iPad Pro was able to blaze through an export of a 4K timeline of a 5-minute project in only 3 minutes. The MacBook Pro using Final Cut Pro took around 4 minutes and 10 seconds, and the MacBook Air took a bit longer, and actually took longer in real time, coming in at over 5 minutes and 30 seconds. So to sum this all up, the iPad Pro is a very powerful machine, and more powerful for my day-to-day use than the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro, at least in terms of the base models. But none of that really matters if it can't accomplish the tasks that most people would want to get done. So let's go over a few different scenarios. For one, I can easily argue that those who are working from home right now and using Zoom, Slack video, Skype, whatever video calling platforms you might actually need, the webcam quality on the iPad Pro is significantly better than the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro. Unfortunately, when in landscape, it always looks a bit weird and you're kind of always looking off to a different side of the screen, but you could just take the iPad Pro off the keyboard, prop it up on a stand in portrait mode for a better angle and a more natural look to others. For students looking to take notes, read textbooks, make flashcards, etc., All of that stuff can be done on a Mac with no problems, but the iPad does offer a few bonus features in conjunction with being able to type out all of those notes and creating presentations, etc. You can now pair it with an Apple Pencil, take handwritten notes, highlight text easily, read textbooks in a more natural setting like in portrait mode, which I've heard people say they much rather do over reading it on a Mac. And it's been a long time since I was a student, but I honestly wish I had an iPad Pro as a productivity tool back over than bringing just my general laptop to class. Creative work can definitely be done on all of these machines, though the iPad Pro is not compatible with some of the apps that I use or need, primarily Final Cut Pro. And learning the replacements usually gets put on hold since I don't really have time to sit down and dig into actually learning the software. But for those of you who work in something like Photoshop or Lightroom, the iPad Pro's Magic Keyboard with trackpad support really changed my view on the iPad as a total laptop replacement. It can absolutely be done for almost a lot of you out there. There are some trade-offs, as I mentioned before. Multitasking is not nearly as good as it would be on a Mac. For those who don't like using Finder or have hated it in the past, I think most of you would gladly take a Finder-style system for files on the iPad over the Files app, and battery life is pretty good, but you'll take a bit more of a hit with the keyboard accessory attached. And although you do get an extra charging port now thanks to the Magic Keyboard, this might still be an issue for some of you out there not having extra Thunderbolt 3 ports. For me personally, I'd probably pick the iPad Pro like 99.9% of the time if I'm doing anything on a computer that's not video editing. So if we take financials out of it, I think the iPad Pro offers more versatility, functionality, and performance, clearly, given the benchmarks that we've seen, over the other two machines. Now, if we add money back into the equation, because it is very important, the base model MacBook Air is by far the best value of the three. The MacBook Pro is more of a workhorse machine and would be my choice out of the three for editing and Final Cut, but to really take advantage, you'd probably want to step up to the models with the 10th gen processors, and those start at $1799. Of course, I would love to know your thoughts about each of these machines. Which one are you thinking about getting? Maybe you picked one up. Which one did you choose? And why did you choose that particular device? Go ahead and let me know in those comments down below. Also, before we end today's video, I do want to give you more information about today's sponsor, OWC. OWC offers a wide range of products for your Mac, like internal hard drives and SSDs, memory, Thunderbolt 3 docks, etc. OWC has a couple of products that I literally use on a daily basis, like the Excelsior 4M2 PCIe module for my Mac Pro, which gives me blazing fast SSD speeds, including soft RAID options, and now comes in a whopping 16 terabyte option. 16 terabytes of SSD storage at 6,000 megabytes per second. That's incredible. When I'm on the go or working between the office or home, I like to use the Envoy Pro EX external SSD because it too is incredibly fast, durable, comes with a built-in Thunderbolt 3 cable so you don't need to bring around any extra cables, and OWC is also bumping its storage to give users the chance to pick up a 4 terabyte model of that external drive. So for more information about these products or anything else OWC has to offer, be sure to click the link in the description down below. This has been Dan with MacRumors. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you around in the next video.